Welcome to Navigating Today's Economy. My name is Nazreen Visram, and today we are going to be taking a closer look at the current economic climate here in the UK with the goal of helping the Jamaat to navigate today's situation. And to help me do this, I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Amin Rajan. Amin is the CEO of Create Research, which is a network of researchers that provide and publish information on topics such as the future of work and the future of finance. So welcome, Amin. And Amin also is a visiting professor at a number of universities, but Amin, I probably haven't done your bio justice really, because you've got such an interesting career history. So please do share with us your career history, what you've been up to, and your role specifically around the economy.
Yeah, well, I graduated with a degree in economics and mathematics, and then I went to work for the UK Treasury.
Okay.
And I was there for about 10 years, and then I went on to be a director of a large program of work at University of Sussex. I was there for about another 10 years. And then I was asked to create this organization called Create Research by European Commission. They wanted somebody to study the effects of the single market, which was going to be created in 1992.
Okay.
You will remember, or probably you were too young then.
Not that young, but yeah, I remember.
You'll remember that, until 1992, there were all manner of barriers to trade within European Union. There were barriers to movement of capital, movement of people, and so on. And in 1992, those barriers were abolished, and Europe became a single market. Yes. And that was a monumental event which led on to the creation of European Union. Mm. And so I was leading a program of research about what were going to be the social consequences of the creation of single market. And it was in the context of that I was asked by Hazriman to write a report about what should be the vision of Jamaat in an integrated Europe. So we produced this report, which came out just before 1992, and the report really looked at what our vision should be in terms of business, in terms of education and training, in terms of our social life, and so on. And we published this report, and it was widely circulated amongst all the Jamaats in Europe. And we also did roadshows and presentations here in UK and also on the continent. And that report went on to create the European Council for the Jamaat right across Europe. And I became one of the early members of the council. And since then, I've been coming to this hall here and making presentations on various issues about work, organization, and society. So it's a great honor to be here today.
Well, it's so great to have you, Amin, and what an interesting history you have and how times have changed from the European Union to where we are today. And obviously Brexit has been a key driver in what's happening in the economy today.
That's right.
So I'm really looking forward to our discussion, because I think there's so many areas we can touch on and really help the Jamaat to kind of navigate the current climate here in the UK.
Yeah.
So I think a good place to start would be the high-level overview of what's happening globally, the state of the economy today, and more specifically, the impact that it's having on the UK. Can you help demystify some of that for us?
Yeah, sure. I think the plain truth is that we're in the middle of a really big crisis, the like of which we haven't seen in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. What has really happened is that two monumental changes have occurred in the last 3 years. One was COVID, obviously, and
Yes.
that led to lockdowns on a nationwide basis in almost every country in the world. And what that basically meant was that the government had to print huge amount of money to help furloughed workers, to help businesses which had to be closed, and so on. And that money was handed out to individuals, but at the same time, a lot of factories were idle, a lot of people had been laid off, so there was excess demand for goods and services. And when there is too much money chasing too few goods, inflation is one of the causes. So that's one reason why we're in the middle of this crisis. It's a legacy of COVID. The second reason is really the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is really another big landmark event in the sense that now energy prices have gone up tenfold. Now, this is a situation of the sort that we last experienced in the 1970s, when there was a war in the Middle East in the early part of that decade. Then there was a revolution in Iran. And as a result of those two events, the price of fuel, or fossil fuel, went up by something like a factor of 6. And inflation then in UK hit 26%.
Wow.
I just arrived as a freshly minted graduate in the UK Treasury, and one of the things I had to do was to predict the path of inflation. And it was absolutely scary. It went from 8% in 1 year to to 14% the second year, and to 26% in the third year.
My goodness.
It really got completely out of control. And for reasons which I'll come to in a few minutes. But the point is really that we're going through the legacy of those two events at the moment. And what we've seen so far is really only a foretaste of what is to come, because central banks have had to increase their interest rates in order to curb demand and in order to curb wage demands and so on, because at the moment, as you know, here in UK, we got so many strikes in the pipeline.
That's right.
Moment. You know, I had difficulty getting here today. And as a result of that, what is really happening is that we're in a situation where workers find that because of inflation, they have to have higher wages. If they demand higher wages, their employers have to put up the prices. And if employers put up the prices, workers want more wages. And so we're in a situation of a vicious circle here. And these sort of vicious circles are very difficult to break. So we're in a situation where, you know, unless governments and central banks act very decisively, we could really descend into a situation the like of which we haven't really seen in our lifetime. So as a result of those two factors, we're in a situation where this tough environment is likely to be here for a while. It's very difficult to predict how long, but if anything, it's going to get worse because the effect of the increases in the interest rates, they take time to work through the system. There's a long pipeline from when interest rates are raised to how it affects individuals. And that pipeline is usually 12 to 18 months. So what we've seen this year is probably not the end of the story. There is more to come in the pipeline. Now, as a result of all this, you know, we're going to be left worse off than we were before this crisis. For example, if you take a basket of grocery in last year, what you could buy with £100, this year it's going to take £112. Next year it's going to take £120. So the value of the pound in our pocket is eroding continuously. And as a result of that, you know, we're left relatively worse off than we were a while back. Now, coming back to your main question about the UK.
Yes.
Amongst the 7 richest economies in the world, UK is likely to fare the worst. Part of the problem is really, you know, that abortive budget that we had under the premiership of Liz Truss. You know, that has caused a huge amount of damage. A lot of it has not been visible to people. Like, for example, those who are pensioners or saving for their pensions, you know, their pension pots have taken a massive hit. And the result of that are going to be transmitted or are going to be visible over a number of years. So that was one reason. But I think another reason why UK is faring very badly is really because growth has been very anemic. We had Brexit, we had policies which were not designed really to tackle some of the fundamental problems that we've got in this country. And as a result of that, you know, UK is not really likely to do well. So my main message is the pound in your pocket is going to lose value, and the UK economy is not likely to recover in a way that, for example, the US economy is likely to do.
My goodness, you've painted quite a depressing picture, actually, Amin, but it's the stark reality of what we're going through right now, particularly globally. As you say, we've come out of the pandemic. You know, we're still feeling the after effects of the pandemic. The war in Russia and Ukraine is obviously really impacting energy prices. That's also, you know, led to inflation, rising costs. And then against the backdrop of a very unstable political climate, I would say, and hopefully it will be interesting to see how the current Prime Minister fares in these difficult times. But I think for me, what was quite interesting is how you brought it down to the average person, right, which is that, you know, last year £100 now requires sort of £111, £112, and that's only going to increase. And we're going to now start touching on, you know, what that means for members of the Jamaat and how they can start thinking about managing their budgets and costs. And we'll come to that shortly. But one other thing that's quite interesting, there's a lot of terminology, right, out in the economy. You know, you touched on inflation, there's stagnation, there's stagflation. It'd be really helpful if you could help simplify some of that language, Amin, for us and talk to us about what's really important and what we should really look out for. Yeah,
I think it's very important to understand what these terms mean because they really envisage a very different economic climate compared to the ones that we were used to. So stagnation, as the name implies, basically means that, you know, you have a lackluster growth in the economy. There is no dynamism in the economy. were basically following a flat line in terms of the growth in the economy. And as a result of that, what you find is that income inequalities are getting bigger and bigger, because if no more wealth is being created, and most of the wealth creation that actually takes place goes to people who are already very well off, we have a situation of rising inequalities. And this has been particularly evident since 2008 crisis. You will remember we had a big crisis, worldwide crisis, which brought the economy to its knees. And since then, things have remained fairly stagnant in almost every country in the West.
So can I just interrupt you there? It's interesting you touched on inequality. And I mean, I work for a bank, so I remember the 2008 crisis very, very well.
Yeah.
Why have we not bridged that gap yet then with inequality? So the rich get richer and the poor are getting poorer, right? So, sorry to divert the conversation, but that's a really interesting point, because we seem to not have learned from previous lessons.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
It's a very fair assessment, and you're absolutely right, and it's a great question. The reason why these inequalities have persisted is that after that 2008 crisis, governments relied on central banks to sort out all the mess. So central banks started printing money like there was no tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And we had huge amount of monetary creation in every country in the world. And interest rates nearly went down to near zero bound. And as a result of that, what we found was that there was a kind of a false sense of prosperity that was created. Stock markets were booming. Bond markets were booming. But underneath that, there were a lot of structural problems that had been metastasizing. Mm-hmm. For example, we have failed to invest enough in education and training in this country. Mm-hmm. For example, we have failed to invest in the high-tech industry in this country, for example. We failed really to have a welfare system which is one which is fair to individuals who can't really find work, but one which also discourages people from not taking up a job. So there are a lot of structural problems.
A lot in the mix, isn't there?
And governments have been very loath to tackle these problems. Mm-hmm. And so what has really happened is that under the veil of central bank action, it was believed that everything will come through, okay, we rely on market forces. Market forces cannot sort out skill shortage problems that we've had in this country. So we had a situation of a lot of immigrants coming into this country. The local people didn't like it. Then Brexit came, and as a result of that, we decided to leave European Union. And this was a fatal mistake, the results of which are going to be felt much further down the line by our children and our grandchildren. So the real reason is that the government were very loath to act in the way that they should have acted. And so the problems were just developing under the surface. And now, suddenly, the kimono is open, and we can see in very stark terms, in the latest report that we published last week, that there are so many problems which really had been metastasizing under the surface. Mm-hmm. Now, these have really sort of come out in the open. And these have come out at a time when government finances are so strapped. We had the furlough scheme, which cost nearly 400 billion last year and the year before.
That's right.
And so there's a limit to how much governments can act. So we've got a situation where we're really caught in some kind of a vicious cycle here. And it really requires very enlightened political leadership of the sort which just does not exist in this country and doesn't exist in America either. I think it's probably better under the new administration in America. But we're a long way away from a situation where governments can act decisively.
Thank you, and apologies for diverting, and I feel like, we probably could have a separate interview on the political climate, so we'll park that one for now, but let's move back to kind of terminology. So you touched on the stagnation, and then stagflation is another term that I hear quite regularly, so help us demystify that. I mean,
stagflation is even worse than stagnation.
Okay.
In that under stagnation, you are not growing, economy is lethargic, no wealth creation occurring on a significant scale, but under stagflation, it's not only stagnation, but at the same time, prices are rising. So we have a situation where living standards are either stagnant or falling, and cost of living is rising. So it's the worst of both worlds, actually. That, we lose out on living standards and we lose out on inflation as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to find that there are regional differences in the way stagnation and stagflation plays out. For example, in North America, US, Canada, they're going to have more of a stagnation because they don't have such a huge reliance on Russia for energy.
That's right, yes.
You know, they're self-sufficient. Here in Europe, we have massive reliance on energy. And it's the energy which is really sort of causing this huge increase in prices. So we, in Europe and particularly here in UK, you know, we're really caught in a stagflation situation where we have the worst of both worlds, where we have stagnation and inflation at the same time. Now, this is something which hasn't really happened very often in the history. So these are truly testing times.
We've talked about some of the terminology, such as stagnation and stagflation, so thank you very much for explaining that to us, Amin. So we're in a real period of instability and uncertainty. As you say, you know, this is a really unusual situation to be in, but it sounds like it's years of, I don't want to say bad policies or bad decision-making, but it's a culmination of different events that have brought us here effectively. So what are some of the longer term trends that we're going to see now as we head now into 2023?
Yeah, and because we're now at a watershed moment, you know, we're going to see a lot of trends.
Okay.
I think I'll focus on three, which really matters most from a Jamaati point of view. So at global level, we're really going to see accelerated rivalry between America and China.
Okay.
And this is really sort of going to bring about another Cold War of the sort that we had between communism and capitalism, you know, when Russia was a superpower. And this is really going to play out very badly in terms of progress in the world. For example, you know, in the last 40 years, America and China have worked together, and that has helped lift something like 500 million people in China out of poverty.
Wow.
And so that kind of cooperation has been very beneficial, and there has been a similar knock-on effect in other parts of the world who trade with China. Now we're going to find cooperation very difficult between those two superpowers because, you know, there is acute rivalry between them now. And we're going to see fragmentation of the world around these two superpowers. And that would make it difficult to make progress on issues about trade, on issues about climate change, on issues about inequality and so on. And what this world needs is cooperation because this is a highly interconnected world now. We haven't had a world of this sort throughout history. And now, whatever happens in one country, it has effects in other countries as well. So at the geopolitical level, you know, the outlook doesn't really look very good. And, you know, I hope that I'm wrong in my analysis, but I think it's fair to sort of point out that at the moment, we don't really see any significant improvement over the next 2 or 3 years in geopolitics. The second level is business. Now, in times of crisis, what you do is you find accelerated innovation because crisis means that there is less spending power in the economy. This increases competition amongst businesses. And in order to remain competitive, you know, there is a lot more innovation. And it's often said that crisis is the mother of innovation. So we're going to see a lot of innovation. And for our Jamaati businesses to survive and thrive in that environment, they really constantly need to make sure that they remain competitive. Competitive in terms of the kind of products they're selling, competitive in terms of kind of service they're providing, competitive in terms of their costs, and so on. So they need to really have a root and branch look at how they run their businesses. So that's at the second level, which is a business level. And the third level is individual. That this innovation that I'm talking about, you know, its upside is that it can create wealth on an untold scale. And we've seen this, for example, with internet platforms, for example, in the last 20 years or so. And there is going to be more of that in the years to come. Now, the upside there is that, you know, there would be wealth creation. But the downside there is that this wealth creation is going to help people who have got the skills and the knowledge to keep up with change. So we're going to see further segmentation in the labor market. And those who have it, they will have it really well. And those who don't have it, they will be marginalized. And this kind of segmentation can work against individuals. And for them, education and training is really the most fundamental way of keeping up with change. But I think, you know, we already have been in a state of what I call Darwinian capitalism or Darwinian competition. I mean, look at the example of Apple phone. iPhone was introduced in 2007, a year in which Nokia, another major manufacturer, had a world market of about 65%. 3 years later, Nokia went out of business, right? Now, Darwinism, as you know, is really about the survival of the fittest, but the fitness really comes from adaptability. And at individual and business level, it's a question of how you adapt. You know, when Darwin wrote his thesis about evolution, he really talked about the fact that it's not the strongest who survive, but the fittest and the most adaptable people who survive. So at the individual level and at business level, you know, we really need to think very hard about how we can manage our relevance in a very fast-changing world.
And that's such an important point you made, our relevance in a very fast-changing world. And I feel like Maulana Hazrimam has talked about this for a number of years, right, around education and training, which you've touched on, lifelong learning. You know, constantly learning is not about just going to university or school. It's throughout our lifetimes enhancing our skills. And in fact, I read a really interesting article in the Harvard Business Review the other day around, you know, how can you continue to make yourself relevant, and that's through certifications, online learning, but also volunteering, which is a real ethic of our Jamaat, right? You know, there's so many skills that our Jamaat can take from volunteering. But your point around adaptability is really key, and something I see in my work in the bank, working with various clients across different sectors. And innovation's a really interesting word, right? Because I think most people, when they think of innovation, they think, I've got to design a new piece of technology, or I've got to come out with the most interesting product, for example, to remain competitive. But sometimes innovation is about taking a processing and making it more simple, or adapting your price margins, for example, or thinking about your marketing campaign, right? It's not always about that kind of high-tech technology, and I think sometimes that's quite misunderstood, innovation.
Absolutely right. So, for example, if you look at a company like Toyota, you know, 20 years ago, Toyota was somewhere around 8th or 9th biggest motor car company in the world. And then as we entered this century, they decided to have a program called Cost Cutting in 21st Century. And they had a very simple formula. Every year, you cut your costs by just 5%. And you also increase your revenue by 5%. And through the power of compounding, the combined effect of the two will have a dramatic effect on corporate bottom line. And they managed to improve their bottom line to such an extent that they started investing in the best state-of-the-art technology. And, you know, until last year, they were the biggest motor car company in the world. You know, they overtook all the giant companies in the United States. And that was largely because of incremental steps leading to a giant leap. Because they understood that in Japanese culture, it's very difficult to make a giant leap. It's a very conservative culture. But, you know, let's take small steps, and it's the most small steps that really sort of produce some big impacts. And, you know, that is one way for our Jamaat to think about it, you know, that it's not very easy for people to invest in new technology or anything. But whatever you're doing, ask yourself two questions. How can I do it better? How can I do all things better? And second question is, how can I do some new things as well on top of that? Because to remain relevant, the old ways of working may no longer be relevant. You need to add a few new things as well. And that's where adaptability comes from.
So two really great questions, I think, that whoever's watching this should take away. How can I do old things better, and what new things can I do? So again, we digress slightly, but I think it's really important to talk about innovation, because sometimes I think it's misunderstood.
Sure.
So we're in this perfect storm, I mean, right? We find ourselves in what we call a perfect storm. So interest rates are going up, and it looks like that's likely to continue. So let's now take it down to a level in the Jamaat around practical terms for families, business owners. How can we mitigate some of the challenges this poses? Because some of it's out of our control, right?
Sure.
But what can we do that's in our control?
Yeah. Good question. I think we need to draw a distinction between those families who have got a lot of savings and those families, you know, who don't have a lot of savings. And those who have a lot of savings, they're going to benefit a lot from increase in interest rates.
Of course, yes.
And so, you know, it's a double-edged sword. But the other side is really that those who don't have much savings, you know, they're really going to find it very difficult to cope in a situation where inflation isn't going to go away. Because as I said earlier on, when inflation reaches this level, it's very difficult to bring it down. So we're going to talk about inflation well in excess of 5% for the foreseeable future. it will remain structurally high. And in that sort of situation, the families really need to think very hard about the difference between the necessities of life and the luxuries of life. Necessities in terms of the amount of money spent on food, shelter, and clothing. Luxuries in terms of having holidays and spending on entertainment and so on. So that they really need to prioritize the necessities over luxuries. I'm not saying they shouldn't have any luxuries or anything. We all like to have a comfortable standard of living. Yeah. But it's very much also a question of living within your means, and prioritization is going to become very important. That's the first thing. The second thing families need to really think about is the fear of unemployment is always going to be there in the background. Let's hope our Jamaati members do not suffer that. But it really pays to save for rainy day. Government assistance is going to become more and more restrictive and limited simply because the government finances are so stretched at the moment that the last thing they're going to do is to provide comfortable living to those people who are unemployed. So rainy day savings is very important. Thirdly, those Jamaati members who have got their personal pension pots, who are responsible for their pension planning, their pension pots have taken a huge hit as a result of the big market drawdowns that we've had this year. And they will really need to think about how they can replenish those pension pots. And basically what that means is that they've got to spend less, they've got to save more, and they've got to work longer.
Okay.
Those are the three things that they really need to do in order to make sure that they still have a comfortable retirement. So again, the message is tighten your belts, because the ride is not going to be easy from here on.
Well, I'm certainly working longer, I mean, I can tell you that for a start. So I completely kind of echo and resonate with everything you say. So looking at families, obviously those with savings are probably in a more fortunate position. But even so, our bills are rising every month. So if you were paying, £200 for a particular bill, that's probably £500 now. So, there's still prudence that's needed at that level. Necessity versus luxury, which you touched on. And I think, you talked about pension pots, which, I'm going to be 47 in the next couple of weeks. And that's, I feel like retirement is a long way away for me. But, it's something, my own personal pension's on my mind. How do I plan ahead and how do I think about that? And I just want to say, obviously, we've got great resources within the Jamaat. The Aga Khan Economic Planning Board is a brilliant resource and provide lots of expertise and guidance for members of the Jamaat should they need to talk about these particular aspects of their own personal finances. But let's touch on businesses now, because I believe that in the UK Jamaat, around 20% of our Jamaat are self-employed. And if you're a small business owner, times are tough, right? With energy costs and remaining relevant and ensuring that you're remaining competitive but still making a profit. So talk to me about some of the things that businesses can do.
Yeah, I think, for those businesses, the formula is very simple, that you have to go that proverbial extra mile for your customers in terms of providing the products that the customers need, in terms of providing products that deliver value to your customers. Secondly, providing good service, because service is very, very important now. It's an important part of the consumption. So provide very good service and really keep a weather eye on your costs, because in the age of rampant inflation, your costs can really get out of control, and then you find that you lose your competitiveness. So my advice will really be to focus very much on customers and go that extra mile in order to please your customer. And if that involves doing all things better, do it. If it involves doing new things, do it. But do not accept status quo. Do not accept business as usual. Have hunger for a creative dissatisfaction for status quo and say, I really want to change things. And crisis always has an upside. It provides a concealed opportunity to tackle issues, which really have been sidelined for a long period of time. We like to remain in our comfort zone. We all suffer from inertia. But here is an opportunity to take a root and branch look at the way you run your business. And as I said, think about the old things better and new things that you really need to be doing. But I think this applies to individuals as well. Yeah, that there is a real risk of marginalization on the part of individuals in terms of their skills base. So, just as businesses really need to think about, how they can really make themselves more adaptable, individuals need to really do that. And that really means, acquiring different kinds of skills, and, sort of constantly thinking about the life after the current job. And some of the skills maybe we can talk about in a few minutes. But, there are some key issues here that individuals need to be mindful of.
Coming back to businesses, is there anything in the autumn statement that came up that can support businesses during this kind of difficult times?
Yes, but I think it's going to come with a lot of strings attached. And so, my advice would be, yes, study the autumn statement, because there may be some government support there. But let your watchword be self-reliance. Because we live in a world where, governments, as I keep saying, they are very strapped for cash at the moment. And whatever support that they provide to unemployed people or to small businesses, that support will come with a large number of strings. And, the bureaucracy of it is really quite suffocating as well. So I don't want to denigrate that support. But at the same time, think of it as a fallback mechanism, as a default option. Let your first option be, how can I be self-reliant? How can I help myself more than anybody else can, including the government?
Some really good key themes coming out here. I mean, prudence, self-reliance, resilience, I think, is a really opportune word at the moment. I think it's really important to talk about resilience. But look, I just want to come back to individuals and families, right? Because budgeting now is more important than ever. I know we talk about it a lot within the Jamaat around personal finances and budgeting, but we're seeing the cost of everything go up, but particularly around healthcare and education. I mean, education is not as accessible as it once was.
That's right.
Particularly university education now. I was talking to my colleague the other day, and he was saying, it's costing him sort of around £20,000 a year with all the fees and the accommodation cost to send his daughter to university, right?
That's right,
So what can families and individuals do to start planning for the cost of these, essential services and requirements that we all rely on and need to progress in the future?
Yeah, it really sort of comes back to the idea about prudent budgeting. So, really draw a very clear distinction between the necessities of life, like food, shelter, and clothing, as I said, and the luxuries. And really prioritize the family budget in a way, really, which puts emphasis on things that matter most in life, the most essential things in life. So, family planning, the budgetary planning is a very important factor. I think the second factor here is really not to think too much about getting assistance from the government, because the government provides a safety net here in the UK, but it comes with a lot of strings. And I think we need to get away from the idea that most British citizens at large have, which is the sense of entitlement, that there is always a government there, the big government, the big sugar daddy who's going to look after us. The government would not look after us. And what we really need to do is to become very self-reliant. And really, that basically means, rethinking, apart from prudent budgetary planning, it's really rethinking about lifestyle. And, putting more emphasis on necessities, but also putting more emphasis on family life, on relationships, on our faith, on climate change. These are the sort of things which are really very important. And when we think about climate change, for example, what are we doing as individuals to make sure that our children and our grandchildren inherit a better planet, or at least a planet which is worthy to live on? And at the moment, there are lots of issues that individuals should really be mindful about. But my main point here is really that we need to become much more aware and think about lifestyle in a holistic sense.
Okay.
Not just material comforts, but relationships, family, faith, all those sort of things. They are very important. And I think once we begin to do that, the jigsaw pieces will fall into place. Now, when it comes to education fees and so on, particularly, those who are at universities, we're loading them with debt. And I think more and more parents will have to take responsibility for funding that debt. Because a large number of our youngsters will not really be able to fund that debt, because once they come out of universities, they think about starting family, they want to get on the housing ladder, And parents will have to play a very big role. I speak with some feelings here, having got 4 children and 10 grandchildren. So, you know, I speak with some feelings here. The main thing here is really that do not rely on your youngsters to do their own thing, to do their own bidding. You really will have to be part of that.
Well, really good advice. My son's 14, so I definitely tried to impart the fact that he needs to think about all the money he gets, pocket money or Eid money or Kushali money. He should be saving that for his future, right, rather than spending it. But it's taking a bit of time for that to land, so some work for me to do. Let's talk about enhancing personal resilience. It's a really key word. We touched on it previously. And one of the things you talked about is employment and the uncertainty around employment. And we're seeing, particularly in the tech world, for example, the number of redundancies that have been made over the past month or so. And we're seeing that in other sectors. We're also seeing skill shortage, right?
Yeah.
Hospitality and leisure, for example, are seeing huge skill shortage. I work in the charity sector, which is finding really hard to recruit the right people and volunteers, etc. So all sectors are being impacted by skills shortage. So you talked about new skills and training and learning. So let's touch on that. How do you stay competitive in a really kind of tough job market? Yeah,
I think it's a very powerful question, and it's something which I think about every day. It's part of my day job, in fact. I think we have to really sort of look at it at 2 levels. You know, let's talk about youngsters, particularly those who are school leavers. You know, I'm very pleased to hear that many of our school leavers are going into higher education, to universities, or they're going into colleges or further education. It doesn't really matter what their destination is, as long as they remain in the sphere of education and training. That would really provide a meal ticket for life, because for them, education and training is important for 2 reasons. The first reason is it improves their employability. Employability in the sense that, you know, it's an entry ticket to a job. Secondly, it helps them to retain the job by becoming more effective. And thirdly, it really enhances their appeal from the point of view of employers as they acquire new skills on the job. So good education really provides a good basis for getting into the job. But not only that, it also provides a base for continuous lifelong learning that Maulana Hazrat talks about. If you cannot have a good base, you cannot build new skills on it. It's just impossible. And that's why many people have fallen victims of technological change, because they were very much focused on a particular trade, and they really couldn't shift to other trades, and they became unemployed. You know, they were the victims of technological progress. So education and training, very important for our youngsters. You know, I cannot emphasize more. I'm very pleased that, you know, we're making progress in this area, but until it's 100%, you know, I would not be satisfied. So I'm setting the bar very high there. Secondly, when it comes to people who are already at workplace, they really need to constantly get into a stage of learning new skills. And, you know, there are 4 avenues of doing it. One of them is really classroom-based training. You know, you work for Barclays. I've run leadership programs at Barclays. And, you know, we have a lot of, you know, high potential people coming to these courses. So it's a chalk and talk type learning.
Of course.
Classroom-based learning. But, you know, that is very, very important as well in terms of understanding the theory of what needs to happen or how it needs to happen. So that's one avenue, classroom learning. Pay a lot of attention to it. Whenever you have chances to go on these courses, take them up. The second form of learning is mentored learning. This is really sort of, you know, working closely with individuals, you know, who really understand the ropes and, you know, who've been around the block, as it were, and you know, download as much information as you can from them. You know, I've had wonderful mentors and coaches in my entire life. I can name so many of them. I've learned more from them than I've learned by having 2 degrees at universities, I have to say. So mentored learning is very important. Find people who have really been around the block, because one person's hindsight is another person's foresight. Learn from the experience of others rather than pay the price of your own mistakes. You know, learn from them. So that's the second one. The third one is experiential learning, that in your job, take on stretch assignments. Take on challenging assignments, you know, which really take you out of your comfort zone. But make sure that you have the resources to survive as well, because you don't want to drown. You know, throw yourself at the deep end, but make sure that you got all the support. because experiential learning is really what distinguishes an individual. Because as we progress in life, people want to know what work we've done, but also what we've achieved, you know. So that's a third form of learning. And the fourth form of learning is what I call network learning. That, you know, network with peers inside your company, outside your company, and in the wider society as well. In this internet age, it's so easy to learn from other people. You know, there are lots of professional websites, social websites, and you know, you can become members of some of these websites and network with people, because in the internet age, you know, your net worth is very much defined in terms of your networks. So those are the 4 key avenues: classroom-based learning, mentored learning, experiential learning, and network learning. Take advantage of those 4 as much as you can. Now, when it comes to skills, you know, I think in the internet age, there are certain skills which are absolutely vital to progress. First and foremost is interpersonal communication skills. Yeah. How you present yourself, how you engage with other people, largely influences the way you motivate them, the way you earn their trust, and so on. Interpersonal skills are absolutely vital. Eye contacts, body language, a lot. You know, there are so many books written about interpersonal communication skills, and, you know, read as many of them as possible, because to me, you know, we're sort of living in a networked world, and how you engage with other people is extremely important. So that's the first skill set. The second skill set is what I call strategic thinking. This is really, you know, setting goals, business goals or personal goals, and designing strategies to achieve them. Yeah? And really have milestones, which basically says, I set out to do this, I have done this, what have I achieved by first year, what have I achieved by second year, and so on. So set milestones and so on. And that strategic thinking is really very important, because what really happens is that we have so many business plans, but very few business plans survive reality. I'm sure you've come across that.
I can echo that, definitely.
It's simply because there is no follow-through. For me, the genius of strategy is not in design, but it's in its execution. So strategic thinking is really about executing your best ideas and delivering results and really setting yourself a high bar. So that's the second skill. The third skill is originality and flair. This is about coming up with fresh ideas and implementing them and convincing other people about the merits of the ideas. And the fourth one is really wider business awareness. You know, that you work for Barclays, but you need to really understand the wider environment in which Barclays operates. You know, what are its strengths and what are its weaknesses, and you know, how can it maximize on its strengths and how can it minimize on its weaknesses, and so on. So wider business awareness is extremely important. Now, you know, there's a whole list of other skills, but these 4 skills to me: interpersonal, strategic thinking, originality and flair, and business awareness, they are extremely important in terms of the adaptability that we were talking about earlier on.
That's such excellent advice, Amin. I mean, you've given such golden nuggets of information there, particularly for our younger members of the Jamaat who are embarking on their careers. One thing I wanted to touch on was mentorship. I'm a big advocate of mentorship. In fact, throughout my career, I've had fantastic mentors and sponsors who've helped me progress throughout my career, and obviously now I reciprocate for more junior members of the Jamaat and within Barclays itself. So interpersonal skills, I absolutely agree. That is the number one thing I look for actually when I interview, because that ability to communicate, relate to someone, and I want to extend that further to emotional intelligence. Yeah. You know, to be able to recognise what's happening in a conversation, in a business negotiation. I think to be able to understand people is such a key skill to survive in your career. And I've learned from many different situations. And I think you're right, in the world where, you know, technology is definitely advancing at such a fast rate, to have these core skills is really important. But if you're sort of in university, or you've just finished university and you're just about to embark on your career, you don't build these skills, you know, that you're probably very early on. So how do you start building, in a competitive job market, how does a young person get strategic thinking skills, for example? Where do you start?
Well, I think where you start is by making progress on an incremental basis.
Okay.
So when I went to work for the Treasury, you know, I came up with certain ideas that they really liked. So they said, okay, give him more responsibility. And through more responsibility, I proved that I could do that. And then, I came up with a lot of ideas. So I think it's really a step-by-step approach. But always set yourself goals every year. That this year, I'm going to achieve progress in these areas. Next year, I'm going to achieve progress in these areas. Do not allow things to just happen by default, because they don't really happen. In a world, if you're really keen to improve your skills, you really have to set these goals. And once you are successful in small tasks, people will give you responsibility for bigger tasks. And this is how people get promoted in organizations, don't they? You must have proved yourself very well once you first started at Barclays in order to get to this exalted position that you've got now. It's fantastic, but you proved yourself. And the fundamental thing is to seek out new challenges constantly and set yourself a high bar and make sure that you have thought about the resources. And going back to this mentored learning,
Yes.
Find a mentor who wants to give something back to the society. And a lot of people I know, they want to give something back. And the best way to do it is really to help the next generation. My philosophy in life is to plant a tree whose shade I'm never going to enjoy. It's all about the next generation.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. Yes, definitely. And, I go back to mentorship. I think that's, we are really lucky. We are a very talented Jamaat. There's lots of experienced individuals. So there's lots of ways in which our younger members of the Jamaat can access that talent and mentorship. And, that's one of the ways that's also helped me throughout my career. So are these the future skills as well? I mean, you write a lot about the future of work.
Yeah.
Would you say these are the core future skills that you've touched upon here?
Yeah, these are the core skills. But I've sort of got a long list I can send you. But these are the skills which are the foundation of success in my view. If you get this right, a lot of other skills would follow, because skills always overlap as well. For example, originality and flair also overlaps with strategic thinking. So there are quite a lot of big overlaps there. But I think these are the skills that I would be especially focused on.
Excellent. So that's really excellent advice, and I hope the younger members of the Jamaat who will be watching this will be taking notes. And I think it's really important to recognise recent messages of Maulana Hazar Imam. He talks about exercising prudence. He talks about resilience. He's talked about wealth creation, generational wealth creation. I feel like lots of things that you've said today, we're very fortunate to have the guidance of our Imam.
Yeah.
Who relays these messages in very, accessible ways. So how can we take this all on board and become more prudent and resilient? And I think it's kind of a bit of a summary of everything you've said today, really.
It is. And to me, prudence is, if I had to have one single guiding star, for me, that would be prudence. Particularly when we live in a world which is gripped by a fog of uncertainty. We live in a period of radical uncertainty at the moment. And at times like this, you really need to be very prudent. So what does Hazar Imam actually mean here? If I understand it right, I think his idea is really, it comes in at three levels. At the most basic level, prudence is fundamentally about being very careful with your livelihood. It's about your livelihood. How you earn your livelihood ethically, how you spend your income wisely, how you save wisely. It's all about sound housekeeping, if I can call it that. Financial sound housekeeping. Don't take on too much debt. Don't try and keep up with the Joneses unless you have the resources to do it. Don't get into too much debt. So the first level is basic sound housekeeping. The second level is really about resilience. All the things we've been talking about. Try and get new skills, become more adaptable, constantly raise the bar. Try and seek out help where you can get the help, and so on. Because to me, resilience and prudence, they are two sides of the same coin. Okay. One defines the other. And so the second level is really about being prudent, is being resilient. And resilience is really like shock absorbers in your car. When you go over potholes or when you go over speed bumps, if you didn't have shock absorbers, the ride would be very bumpy and very uncomfortable. But, they absorb all the shocks that really come as a result of those faults in the road. So resilience is fundamentally about developing shock absorbers which help you sustain your livelihood. So the first level was about the livelihood. The second level is about sustaining that livelihood effectively. Third level is something much more deeply personal in my view. It is really about the meaning of life. It is fundamentally about leading a congruent life. A congruent life in which we think about our spiritual well-being, we think about our physical well-being, we think about our emotional well-being, we think about our families, and above all, we have responsibility. We develop responsibility for those who are much less fortunate than us. Because for our good fortune, we have responsibility towards others. So to me, Maulana Haji Imam Farman really comes really at the three levels. It's very important to know one's about financial planning, the other one is about sustaining that, and the third one is about better things in life, which really give a better meaning to our lives.
You've articulated that so beautifully, and I think it's such a lovely way actually to end, on an interview it's been a little bit depressing at times, hasn't it? I mean, let's face it, with the current economic climate, but we are so fortunate that we have an imam who guides us according to the times, and you talk about the prudence, resilience, but balance. Balance is so important, and our faith plays a key role in how we address some of the challenges that we're going to face now and face as we go into the new year. So look, I know you have a thought for the day, don't you, Amin? And you were really keen to share that with us before we kind of end this discussion. I don't want to call it an interview because I feel like it's more of a discussion, but tell me, what's your thought of the day?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize for sounding so alarmist in my analysis. I didn't mean to be, but, I had to state the facts as they are, rather than as I would like them to be. So, first of all, I'm sorry if I have alarmed
many Jamaati members. No, you've told us the truth and reality, I mean, that's where we are.
Yeah, but, let me end on a brighter note. As we know, every dark cloud has a silver lining. And out of this crisis, let's see the crisis as a concealed opportunity to really re-examine the way we live, the way we work, the way we behave towards each other, and really create a very resilient community, which is widely admired around the world. And I wish the Jamaat every success in that noble endeavor.
There's so many things that have come out of this discussion, right? You've educated us on the economy, so the macro elements of the economy to some of the terminology that we hear every day in the news or read in the newspapers. You've talked about how the Jamaat, whether that's an individual, a family, or a business owner, can budget, can manage things better, can look at their prudence, their resilience, how they can be innovative. And there's so many things, so many nuggets of really amazing information that you've shared. But for me, again, I think the key words are prudence and resilience, setting goals and measuring them. I think that's important. Balance, balance in terms of our faith, the din and the dunya, which the Imam talks about on a regular basis, and living our life in an ethical manner in accordance with our faith, but how that translates in the way we earn, in the way we save, and in the way we kind of, I guess, wanted to say that how we address the challenges.
Yeah.
So thank you, Amin, for sharing your guidance, your expertise, your knowledge with the Jamaat today. I'm sure each and every one of us who have been watching will take away something that will help us face the challenges that are ahead.